everyone, and welcome to the fourth session in American English Live Series 13. We're so excited that each of you are here with us today. My name is Chris, and I'll be with you today along with my colleague behind the scenes, Heather, who will be moderating, helping answering your questions, and responding to comments during the session. So let's begin today with two thoughtful audience comments from our most recent webinar, Effective E-Reading, helping students stay on task while reading online. First up is Irene from Tanzania. She says that the session has clearly opened my eyes to why I hated online reading, but now I'll be able to overcome the challenges and tell those around me how to overcome them as well. That's great, Irene. Thank you so much. Next up, we have Susie from Korea. Susie says, absolutely wonderful session. I learned so much and gained a lot of new insight on reading. I've been struggling with helping my students read recently, and I will definitely be using these activities in the very near future. That's great, Susie. We're so glad to hear it. Much appreciated. So we love to see our teacher participants actively engaged in professional development. So please continue to share your thoughts about our webinars by offering feedback through the end of session quiz or by emailing them to americanenglishwebinars@fhi360.org. We may feature one of your comments during the next webinar. Throughout Series 13, we are celebrating English Teaching Forum's 60th anniversary. English Teaching Forum is a quarterly peer-reviewed journal published by the U.S. Department of State that offers practitioner articles that reflect current TESOL theory and practice for international language educators. Each session in this series will be led by invited English Teaching Forum authors and will cover article topics related to reading, storytelling, and learning disabilities. We hope you'll be able to use the practical ideas we share. We wanted to let you know that in the United States, daylight savings time starts on March 13th, 2022. At that time, clocks will be set forward 1 hour later in the United States. This means that the final two sessions in Series 13 take place at 8 a.m. and 1 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time. This may be 1 hour later in your local time zone. Please confirm your local start time for AE Live 13.5 and 13.6 using the links shown on the slide and being shared in the comments now. Be sure to enter the dates March 16th and 30th when using the time zone converter. So here's what to expect today. The session is about 60 minutes long. The presenter will present the material and I, as your host, will ask questions and make comments too. But we really hope to hear from you, our audience, so that we can address your ideas and experiences. Please do share your thoughts using the comments feature or chat box. When our session comes to a close today, you will have an opportunity to receive a digital badge for your participation. At the end of the webinar, we'll share a link in the comments. Click on that link and complete a short quiz about today's session. You must answer 2 out of 3 multiple choice questions correctly. Once you have successfully passed the quiz, you can expect to get your badge via email within about a week. Now, let's begin today's webinar, Task-Based Reading Activities Using Authentic Materials and Skills. In this session, we'll examine 2 reading activities that involve station-based learning and authentic materials. These activities are designed to promote a range of reading skills while maximizing learner engagement, critical thinking, and learner autonomy. In addition to discussing the procedures and rationales for the activities, we'll explore options for adapting these classroom-tested ideas to succeed in a variety of ELT contexts. And we are pleased to introduce our presenter, Mina Gavel. Mina has been working in the TESOL field since 2008. After teaching EFL in South Korea, she returned to the US where she worked with international EAP students and obtained her MA TESOL from Concordia University. In 2018, Mina served as a US Department of State English Language Fellow in Uzbekistan, teaching English and ELT methodology and leading professional development events. In January 2021, Mia returned to Uzbekistan as a coach with the English Speaking Nation Project. Currently, she can be found in Mombasa, Kenya, where she is serving as an English language fellow at the Technical University of Mombasa. Welcome, Mia. So glad to have you here today.
Thanks, Chris. Thanks for the wonderful introduction. Hello, everyone at home or work or wherever you are out there. It's really great to be here. I feel really lucky to talk about these two activities, task-based activities that I developed. I really enjoyed doing them, and I, for that reason, decided to write about them. And so I'm especially happy to be here and able to talk about it with you all. So this is task-based reading activities using authentic materials and skills. If you haven't had a chance, this is the article. It came out, I think, last summer. And so hopefully you'll find today's session interesting and useful. And there's more ideas here, a little bit more about the theory behind it, as well as further adaptations to what we talk about today. So before we get going, I have a question for you all at home. Probably a lot of you are reading teachers or have taught reading in the past, though it's possible some of you have never taught reading. I'm curious to know how you feel about teaching reading skills. You could just share your opinions, or if you have any great strategies, that's always wonderful. And then I'm guessing probably a lot of you have also had some challenges. So please feel free to share in the chat.
Yeah, everybody, let us know your thoughts and feelings about teaching reading skills. As Mina said, what are your opinions, your thoughts, any strategies, or any challenges? We know that there's always going to be some challenges. We'd love to hear from you. So please let us know. So we're getting lots of greetings. Mina, everyone's very happy and excited to be here. That's great. We'll see if people can respond to some of their opinions or strategies. So yeah, we got a great global audience. Everyone's saying hello. Let's see if we've got some. Yeah, that's a great start. Yeah, let's see if we've got any strategies coming in at all or any ideas. We have someone saying need to research the background of the reading topics before teaching, or some. Celia says, I feel listening skills are one of the most challenging to teach. We have someone else saying that I really love reading, but most students get bored, so I have to look at their interests. That's a great idea. Yeah, it can be difficult. Someone's saying that to do surveys or scan the text, it can be difficult with students who are not reading in their mother tongue. So yeah, lots of opinions here. Thank you, everybody, for sharing. They're wonderful.
Great. Yes, thank you for sharing. It does sound like we do have a lot of challenges. Hopefully today's session can help you out with some of those challenges. All right, so let's talk about our plan today. Before we get into the actual activities, we're going to kind of set a foundation and talk about some key concepts that are important today. And then the activity is kind of broken into two stages, and we'll look at each of those individually. After that, we'll kind of put on our teacher thinking caps and do some analysis. And then finally, and most importantly, we'll look at ways that we can adapt so that you can bring these back to your classrooms and use them in real life. All right, so let's look at some key concepts here. So these first two things, we have task and authentic materials. Those are definitely important to discuss because they're part of the title of the article and today's presentation. But we'll see that another very important concept today is stations. So first, let's talk about task. Task is something that is commonly talked about in our field, and it can be used in many different ways. It can be used very generally or very specifically. So I'm going to turn the spotlight on you, Chris, and see what you think about this. When you think about the term task, what do you think of?
Yeah, when I think about the term task or what it means to me, I think about doing a job or getting some work done, or from a student's perspective, having the teacher kind of assign me a project or something to do for the class.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so it sounds like some work you have to do. Yeah, we can use it in a very general way like that, where anything that we assign to students, anything we ask them to do can be considered a task. But I'm going to give you a more specific definition that I like. For the purposes of today's talk and the task-based activities, I'm using this definition from Jane Willis, and she defines task as a goal-oriented activity in which learners use language to achieve a real outcome. And so a task is a type of activity, but is a very specific kind of activity that is goal-oriented. So if I just ask my students to talk to each other, that's an activity, but it doesn't really have a goal. And what's also important is that there is a real outcome or an outcome related to real life, which is important here. So we have a lot of examples here. Games are a real life thing that we do. They have an outcome like a winner or loser. We do information gap activities where the goal is to find these missing pieces of information. We do role playing. We have students make posters. They write stories, all kinds of things. They might even make a list of things that they would like to have, or their future goals, things like this. These would all be examples of tasks in the way that I'm defining it here.
Yeah, and Mina, we've got a couple, I'm sorry, Mina, we had a couple of people commenting too about what their meaning was, so I wanted to share those. We have Azan saying meaningful outcomes or the process, very similar to your definition. And we have Richard saying doing things cooperatively and collaboratively.
Okay, then we're on the same page. That's great. We could probably do a whole session about task-based learning or task-supported learning, but from today, the reason that I chose this approach was because this is about reading, and some of the challenges mentioned earlier when we were talking with the teachers. It's difficult to read, especially in your second language. And when we do this, often learners tend to focus on little things like individual words and grammar. And so they read very slowly, and they often get to the end of a text and don't really have any meaning. So a task-based approach gives them some kind of goal that they're trying to achieve, and it helps them to look at the bigger picture. And as mentioned, it is very suitable for group and pair work. We have something very interactive going on. So let's check your understanding. Let's imagine I'm a teacher and I've been teaching the simple past, and I'm ready for my students to do some practice. So I'm thinking maybe I'll have them write 5 sentences using the simple past. Or I also have this other idea where I'm going to have students pair up and interview each other, ask about the weekend, and write down 5 things their partner did. So audience at home, I'm going to turn this over to you, ask you to answer in the chat. According to what we just talked about and the definition that I just gave, which of these two can we consider a task, and why would we consider it a task?
Yeah, everybody, let us know, based on what Mina just told, what a task is, which 2 of these examples do you consider a task? Is it writing 5 sentences using the simple past on the left of your screen, or interviewing your partner and writing down 5 things he or she did last weekend? Let us know in the chat. We'd love to hear what you have to say about which one of these are a chat. We have Nada saying the second one, and Nazi saying interview is the real task. Lots of people saying, yeah, the second one, the interview is the task. We have Michaela saying the first one's a task, the second one's an activity or interactive. We've got a few people also saying that both of them are tasks. Seems to be more votes for the interview though, Mina, I would say.
Okay, yeah, I would agree. So in a loose definition, it's true. We can both consider them tasks in that they are something a student has to do. But using the definition that Jane Willis gave us earlier, I would consider the first one not to be a task so much. It really is focused on form. If you tell students write sentences in the simple past, they're really going to be focused on those simple past verbs. They're not going to be thinking so much about meaning. And this is more like an exercise. Practice like that, the sentences won't necessarily apply to them. However, if you give them this second activity to do, this is more of a task. They are not necessarily thinking about the form. They're thinking about finding out what their partner did, sharing what their partner did. This is related to their real life. It's something that they did last weekend. And because they're interviewing and talking, this requires interaction. So using the definition that I mentioned today, this is what we're talking about in terms of a task and the kind of thing we would do with task-based or task-supported learning. All right, nice job. All right, our next concept, I think, is familiar to many people at home, and this is authentic materials. I'm going to turn this right over to the audience and ask you all, are you familiar with authentic materials? What does it mean to you? Can you come up with your own definition of authentic materials?
Yeah, everybody, let us know in the chat. What do you think the term authentic materials means, or what does it mean to you? We'd love to hear from you. Let's see, we've got someone saying real materials. just kind of general items to relate to what you're working on. So yeah, let us know, everybody. Yeah, we've got lots of great ideas. Physical things like real things like coupons, newspapers, corpus data, immigration forms, any kind of pamphlets, zoo pamphlets, garden pamphlets, any magazines. Yeah, Fernando, great response. Yeah, lots of different, any kind of materials here, people are saying. Let's see, concrete and real, advertisements, magazines, newspapers. So yeah, lots of great examples of authentic materials. Thank you, everybody. Great responses.
Those were great responses, and it sounds like a lot of you are very familiar with what authentic materials are, and those were some really great and creative examples. So let me share my definition with you. It's just a very general one. Authentic materials is a huge and broad category that's anything that is not created for language learning purposes. So of course we think of books and newspapers, magazines, TV, radio, things like that. A lot of pamphlets were mentioned by the audience, but this can be anything. It can be your emails, your texts, messages you write on Facebook, the shopping list you make before you go to the market. These are all authentic skills, or sorry, authentic materials that are not created for language learning purposes. They're really popular in our field because, for one thing, they're quite interesting. They're not something fake that are made for students to practice their grammar, vocabulary, pronunciation with. These are real life audience items, and they often share a lot about culture as well. So they're quite motivating as well. And thinking about the goals of our learners, hopefully their goal is to use language outside of the classroom. So when we bring authentic materials into the classroom, we can help prepare and scaffold them to use language outside the classroom and give them the confidence to do so. So let's check again your understanding. And Chris, you're going to be my model student here. I have some materials here. The first thing we see here on the left is the Shopper News, which is a weekly newspaper. The second, some of you at home might be familiar with, is the Voice of America website. Hopefully all of you are familiar with the third item there, which is the English Teaching Forum. And then lastly, we have Betty Azar's English Grammar book, which probably a lot of you are familiar with too. So Chris, can you take a guess here? Which of these would you think is not authentic?
Yes, absolutely. Love seeing the English Teaching Forum up there, of course. Definitely going to say that's authentic. And then my guess for the one not being authentic, as much as I love Miss Betty Azar's English Grammar, I don't think that's an authentic material.
Ding, 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 ding. You are correct. Very good. Yeah, that first item there, the Shopper News, that is an authentic material. It's something that I read every Wednesday when I'm home in the US. It tells me about local news, advertisements, things like that. Mentioned earlier, Voice of America is something used worldwide by people to get their news. English Teaching Forum is something that is used by teachers, but it's not used as an exercise. It's used by teachers to do their job. And so it is an authentic material, and you are absolutely right. The English Grammar book is great for practicing grammar, but any native speaker is not going to use this book themselves. The only reason they would use it is to give their students to practice their grammar. Great job. All right, the last concept we're going to talk about today is stations, and this is a distinct physical work area in the classroom. So if we have some desks, we can take some of those desks and consider those different stations, or if we have tables. If we have a big table, we could split it up and have different stations there, or we can even use the entire classroom. So maybe imagine the four corners of the classroom are 4 different stations, or one station is the teacher's desk, another is the door, another is a window, something like this. Again, there's a lot of advantages to using stations. We could probably go on all day about it, but I had a very specific reason for using stations. The activities I'm going to talk about use a lot of materials, and I didn't want things to get disorganized. As probably many of you know, if you bring a large number of materials or anything and distribute them to the class, everything quickly becomes disorganized. Nobody can find what they're looking for. One student has everything and everyone else has nothing. And so with stations, the material stays at the station and doesn't move. So instead, we have the students moving, which is also a great thing. When they're moving, we get more blood to the brain, and so we have more effective learning. Studies have shown that students are better able to remember the learning that happens, and they have a more positive association with it as well. And then, of course, it's nearly impossible to fall asleep while moving, and sleepiness can be a problem in a reading class. Some of you at home may still be thinking, I don't understand what you mean by stations. So let's have a visual example. Let's imagine that this is my classroom here. And so I'm going to have 5 stations, and I've split up the room like this. We'll imagine these are 5 tables. Up at the top there, we have some students sitting down, and they're, let's say, working in their books. So I've assigned them a page number and some exercises, and they're working there. At the next station, we look and we see some students are busy making something. So perhaps they're making a poster or infographic or something based on something I've assigned to them. Meanwhile, we have a group of students who look like that they are just enjoying themselves, sitting around and talking. Maybe I've given them some sort of problem to solve or some discussion questions to talk about. And then at the next station, we see that there is a computer, a laptop or desktop set up. And maybe I have put it to a certain web page I want students to look at, or maybe there's some sort of interactive game for them to do. And then finally, at this last station, this is not always the case, but let's imagine the teacher can be here. This is a nice opportunity for the teacher to work with a smaller group of students, maybe have a discussion or clear up some confusion, something like this. The teacher doesn't have to necessarily be at one of the stations. You'll see that during my stations, I'm just monitoring, but this is a possibility. There's several ways to do this as well. It might be that after 10 minutes, everyone gets up and maybe they move in a clockwise direction onto the next station. Or maybe this is something that they can move around as they like. When they're finished at one station, they move on to the next. It might also be something, maybe you do stations 3 times a week and you tell students that during the week they have to do 3 different stations and not necessarily all of them. There's many different ways that we can do this. Growing up in the US, stations are something that I worked a lot with and I really enjoyed. I liked the variety involved with them, but I'm curious about the audience. So how many of you have experienced working with stations, either when you were younger as a student in school, or maybe more recently, maybe you've used stations while teaching?
Yeah, everybody, let us know your experience with learning stations, whether as a learner or a teacher. We'd love to hear from you. So please share with us your experience working with learning stations in the chat. Great. Yeah, we see some people just still talking about your authentic materials and just really giving more great examples, Mina, which is wonderful. We've got a couple teachers saying that unfortunately not, they have not experienced learning stations, or no, this is the first time they've heard them. Sometimes, yeah, Maricela says as a learner, she did, and it was great. And then recently, Nadal recently at a seminar worked with stations. And Sergio said, yeah, as a student, I worked with stations. It was great to interact with my fellow classmates. And then lots of both too, both as a student and as a teacher. And then I'm also seeing some other people say, no, this is the first time I'm hearing about this. I've never used stations before. But yeah, then, so yeah, lots of different experiences, Mina. So I think that's great.
I think that's great too. So those of you who are familiar with it, great. And those of you who are not, then this will be a great introduction to it. All right, let's move on. Okay, so we have set a foundation with our key concepts, and now we're ready to kind of dig into the tasks. So as mentioned, there are 2 stages here, the first and the second. And the first one is kind of broad. In this, the goal is kind of for students just to do some exploration of the materials that are there and to evaluate these texts. Just to give you a little bit of background, I developed this while I was in Uzbekistan. I was teaching at a university, and I was teaching reading and writing classes to pre-service teachers, or future English teachers, in other words. About 80% of them were future English teachers, and the rest wanted to be either guides or translators. I had 16 students max in a class, and they were 80-minute classes. Before I go any further, some of you may be thinking that this is not even at all like what your teaching context is like, but don't worry. We're going to talk about ways that we can modify this for different types of classes, different levels of students, even very beginners. Also ways that we can deal with a larger class size too, so don't fret. My objective with this, we had been doing a lot of writing in the class, and we were moving into a reading focused part of the curriculum. And so it's this was the introduction to reading. And so of course I wanted students to practice their reading skills. And while they're doing that, I also wanted to assess their strengths and weaknesses so that I could better tailor future classes to them. And most importantly, I wanted to motivate them to read because I think it is so important. To clarify, the skills that I'm talking about, I think will be familiar to many of you. We're doing looking at doing skimming and scanning, looking to identify main ideas, key details, to make inferences or educated guesses using what we can find there, and also making a personal connection, such as deciding whether they liked what they read or not. These are skills that I think are very common in reading classrooms, and they're often done in textbooks or on worksheets or something like that. And they can become very repetitive and boring. And so I was looking for a way to do all of this in a more interesting and exciting way. So let's look a little closer. So in my procedure, first thing that I had to do was find some materials to use. So I decided to use authentic materials because I thought that they would be a lot more interesting and motivating for my learners. As mentioned, we often work with textbooks and things like that, and they can be quite boring. So I looked for a variety of types of materials: books, newspaper, game instructions, maps, a menu. I was in an academic situation, so I brought in some academic texts, but I do think non-academic reading is also important to prepare learners to be outside the classroom. And I was very lucky in that I was able to find materials at the university. I had some things at home that were for my own use. And then I later managed to find some things around town as well. So I was lucky in my ability to find authentic materials. I am curious for the viewers at home, are authentic materials available to you? Which ones? And if not, what other materials are available to you?
Yeah, everybody, let us know about your accessibility to authentic materials. Do you have them available? And which ones do you use? We'd love to hear the types of authentic materials that you guys use. Please let us know in the chat. Or if they're not authentic, any other materials that you might use too. We'd love to hear about it. Let's see, we've got Azan saying that I normally get authentic materials online. That's great. Mihaela saying bringing in newspapers, journals, books, leaflets, lots of, Micah Todd saying and lots of options online. Charo saying using like decorations, items too, or anything with words. Lots of people saying that they find their authentic materials online, but some people's putting out saying they don't necessarily have the internet all the time. But yeah, using letters, Sergio saying letters, Lorena saying she thinks a novel can be considered an authentic material, Nadia saying materials from textbooks, Fernando talking about physical reading materials, lots of things that have been mentioned today already: magazines, pamphlets, manuals, postcards. Ooh, I like this one. Airport discount coupons, museum tickets, all great authentic materials. Thank you so much, everybody.
I love this creative approach to finding authentic materials. That's awesome. So if finding authentic materials is not so easy for you, again, don't fret. We will come back to this issue later in our session. All right, so once I had collected and found these materials that I wanted to use, I created questions that would relate to those skills I was looking to practice. So I wanted students to be able to identify the type of text, main ideas, details, make inferences, and then also determine whether these items were useful or not. All right, so let's look at the classroom. So imagine this is my classroom. I have my materials, I have my questions. And so I use these desks as my stations and I set out my materials. I also numbered all the stations so that it's clear to the students which station is which. So they're numbered 1 through 9. And now it is time to bring the students into the classroom. So I paired the students up or grouped them if I had uneven numbers, and I passed out their question worksheets. So let's look at the question worksheet. So you can see there, we have station 1 and we have questions, station 2, questions, and it goes on and on like that for all 9 stations. If you look closely, if you can see, questions 1 through 6 for every station are the same. The first 3 questions have a definite right or wrong answer. The title, what is it? Is it a book, a map, magazine? Is it fiction or nonfiction? Questions 4 and 5 require them to make some inferences. So they don't know exactly, but they need to kind of make an educated guess about who the intended audience is and why they would read it. Question number 6 is where they make their personal connection. Are they interested in reading it? Why or why not? There's no right or wrong answer. And then questions 7 and 8 are individual to each station. So these are reading for detail questions. This made my job a lot easier. I only needed to create 2 specific questions for each of the materials. Those of you at home who are thinking this is going to be a lot of paper to print, don't worry. It's not necessary to print out worksheets. Instead, you could write the questions on the board or project them. If you have individual questions, you could just put the questions at the station with the material. So it's absolutely not necessary to print out. Students can just write answers on a piece of paper or their notebooks. All right, so students have their worksheets, they're ready to go. What should they do? So I gave them their instructions that they could start anywhere they wanted to. So if they saw something interesting, they could head right over to it with their partner. They were free to move at their own pace. There was no time limit. And they didn't need to complete all the stations. And so if something was difficult or interesting, they could spend more time on it. If it was easy or not interesting, they could move quickly. Also, if something was difficult, they could skip some of the questions, or of course, they could ask for help. So let's look again in our classroom. So here's our station set out. The students come in and we imagine that they're instantly drawn to forum because who wouldn't be? They answer their questions and then they leave their station and they move on to the next thing that is interesting to them. The whole time, I'm just kind of monitoring. I'm making sure that there's not a bunch of students all gathering at one station. So kind of monitoring the flow there. You'll notice there are 9 stations, but I have at the most 8 groups. And this is for some flexibility. This way, they're not always waiting for the next group to move on so that they can go there. There's always this extra station available. And I'm also doing a lot of informal formative assessment, meaning that I'm just kind of noticing and making note of what things are difficult, what things are easy, what things they're not interested in, and of course, what things are interesting to them. And then it's time to wrap up the class. So this did not go so well because my students did not want to finish the class. So this was a little bit of a challenge. I did have 2 final questions. I wanted them to identify the skills they used during the activity and find out if they enjoyed it. I want students to be aware of their own learning and be able to identify what they're doing. And of course, I want to know if they're enjoying themselves or not. I wanted to spend more time discussing areas of difficulty or confusion, but as I was trying to have this discussion, students were still moving around the different stations. They were still looking at the materials. They did not want to stop. And I ended up collecting their worksheets because, as I mentioned, this was the beginning of our reading unit. And so I really wanted to see what was difficult for them, what was easy for them. All right, I think that we're ready to give it a try. So I have my model student here, Chris, and we imagine he's just come into the classroom and he and his partner have come over to this station and they see this piece of text. Audience at home, you can be doing this on a piece of paper or in your heads if you like. So Chris and his partner have taken a moment to just kind of skim and see what this is. And now they're ready to use their scanning skills. And they have a couple questions to answer. So the first question would be, what is this?
Yeah, my quick skim, I see that it's from the internet. It looks like it's from a website. So from a web page. As I'm doing some more scanning, I can see the big bold letters. I can see Education USA, support for international education. So then for number 2, I guess who the audience would be intended. I think for students looking to study in the US, I would say, Mina.
Excellent. That is why you are the model student. Very good. Yeah, so there's definitely a right answer to number 1. It is a website. And for number 2, that's where you're using your inferencing skills. There might be more than one answer, but I think you pretty much nailed it. So we can imagine that either I've printed out this web page, or perhaps there's a computer sitting at the station and it's there. Question number 3, I'm going to turn over to the audience based on what you see and what you've heard. Would you be interested in reading this text? Why or why not? Or perhaps would you be interested in recommending it to someone?
Yeah, audience, let us know based on this text that Mina's sharing with us. Are you interested in this? Would you read this? Why or why not? Roya is saying, oh, this is very interesting. We have some other people saying, yes, I'm interested in this. It's or Siva's about saying, yes. The second question, going back to the second question for students, and Leslie Via saying, yes, I can see that it's a website for students who are interested in studying in the US. I am interested in that, but I think mostly maybe teenagers or students, pupils. Abby's saying that she would suggest this for students looking to study in the US. Mihalis saying the similar, that I would recommend it to students who want to study. Yeah, basically interesting for students to learn more about education in the USA. So I think our wonderful audience, yeah, I think they answered our question about who should read it, whether or not maybe they would like to read it or not. But yeah, people are saying that it's interesting. If you know, and they're very interested in it. So overall, that's great.
Great. Again, there's no right or wrong answer to it. Just trying to get that personal connection to our reading, which I think is really important. So that's a kind of a sampling of how the first stage is. So we're ready to move on to the second one. So now we're ready to kind of raise the stakes a little bit. Here we're going to be doing reading for problem solving. So students are going to read in order to make decisions and suggestions and to justify their answers, meaning to explain why those answers are. So why did I do this? Background here. I now have students who are familiar with this kind of group of authentic materials, and I could see that they're interested. So I want to make use of these materials. They've also shown me that they are competent in their reading skills. They showed me that they were, for the most part, able to achieve the task that I had set out for them. So they are ready to move on. And then, to be honest, the main reason I created this second stage is because they all asked to do the activity again, which I can't just do the same activity again. So I had to create or add on to this first stage. So my objectives here were a little more challenging as well. So here I want students to evaluate and choose texts according to the suitability. And based on that, they should make some suggestions about them. And also I wanted them to justify their decisions, which is most important for them to explain the decisions that they're making. Basically, I wanted this to be more challenging. I was looking for my students to raise their level of critical thinking and also to kind of increase the authenticity of this. So kind of more problem solving, something that we do in real life. All right, so let's look closer. So now, again, I have to collect materials. I have this base of materials that I had used in the first stage, and then I added to this, I collected more materials. I had a map in the first one, I had another map. I had a grammar book, I had another grammar book. I had game instructions, I printed off another one for a different game. And I created 2 scenarios to make this more realistic. On the left, we see the scenario that Tim is an English teacher and he is basically looking to develop professionally, have better classes. And so these are the resources that he can use. I mentioned that not all my students were teachers, or some of them were going to be teachers but weren't happy about it. So I had this other scenario for them. And this is someone who's going to do some traveling and needs to research the trip they're about to take. And this is Maria. And so these are the resources on the right that are available to her. All right, so moving on. So if, for example, to look at the questions, we'll look at Tim's questions. He's the English teacher. I created 7 questions for his scenario. So for example, question number 1, Tim wants to be a better grammar teacher. Please suggest a book that will help him to do this. Please explain why you suggested this. So we see that there were all those materials. Students need to find the grammar books, and there's more than one. And so now that they've identified the grammar books, they need to decide which one is the better one. There may or may not be a correct answer, but again, they need to justify and explain their answer. I didn't use worksheets this time. Instead, I cut up these 7 pieces, or these 7 questions, and I put the pieces of paper into an envelope. And then I did the same thing with Maria. I created 7 questions for Maria. I cut them up and put them in an envelope. So let's look at our classroom again. Let's wait. So then I took everything into the classroom, and I just had 2 stations now. I had 1 station for Tim and his materials and 1 station for Maria. And I had those envelopes of questions taped to the front of the class. The students came in, I paired them and grouped them, and then I gave them their instructions. These instructions were a lot more specific than the first time. So here, students were only allowed to choose 1 scenario. They could not go back and forth between them. So they were either with Tim's scenario or with Maria's scenario. And they select 1 question at a time from the envelope. They look at the question, they find the materials, and then they return the question back to the envelope and choose a new one. They are writing their answers in their notebooks or a piece of paper. And this time they do have to complete all 7 questions. So I'm looking for completion of the task this time. All right, I think now we're ready to look at the classroom. So this was my classroom, but then I pushed the desks together to make 2 tables. And so it looks something more like this. And we imagine on the left, imagine that that is a table of materials. In real life, it's actually my apartment floor with everything laid out. And then I have taped the envelope of Tim's materials up onto the board. And then on the right-hand side, I have another table with Maria's materials. I've taped her envelope to the board, and then the students have to run up to the board, get their question, and then return it when they're done. So I still have that movement going on. And while this is happening, what I'm doing, of course, is monitoring and supporting. This was much more challenging than the first task, a little more pressure to finish. And so I really needed to be there for support. One main thing was reassuring students that there wasn't one right answer. A lot of them were concerned when they realized there was more than one possible answer. But what was important, that they explained themselves clearly why they chose what they chose. Ending the class went a little more smoothly with just the 7 questions. I had the 2 groups get together, so everyone working on Tim's scenario talked together to check answers. Same thing with Maria's. Things that were still confusing after they discussed, then we shared aloud. Students could share things that were difficult for them, and also things that were interesting, which was important because they were very curious about what was going on in the other group. And again, I collected this information for future lesson planning. All right, I think we're ready to give this a try. All right, I have my model student. Again, Chris, I hope you're ready for this. So you and your partner managed to, within this pile of materials, narrow it down to these 2 items here. They're both from the lighter side, which is found at the end of Forum magazine, or for end of Forum, fun kind of puzzle activities. And so the question that you have to answer here, I'm a teacher and I've been working on verb tenses with my students. They've gotten really good at form, but I would like them to work more on understanding the meaning of verb tenses. So I'm looking for an activity to help them to understand the meaning of verb tenses more. So let's look a little closer and see exactly what's going on with these two materials. The first here is Sophie's 7 tasks. So we see at the top, there's 7 things that Sophie does. And then below we have some questions there. So we have some sentences, and then we have to use the time clues and tenses in each sentence to figure which one of 2 things happened first. So that's Sophie's. And let's look at the next one. This is an email here. So it's an email about yesterday's English club. Students read the email. And then at the bottom, we see 8 events. Again, using tenses and time signals, students should put these 8 events in order. Okay, Chris. So I'm looking for something for my students to do to help them focus on meaning of verb tenses. What would you recommend to me and why?
Yeah, focusing on meaning of verb tenses. Well, first of all, this is great. I mean, I love the lighter side section of form. And I think both of these examples, Sophie's 7 tasks and the English club email, I think they're both good for this task. But depending on my students and like their language level, that would probably determine my choice. But based on these 2, I would recommend the one on the left, Sophie's 7 tasks. I think it might be a little bit easier and more accessible for English language learners. So, but both of them are good though.
I think that is an excellent answer. They are, I would say, they're both great for what I'm looking for. And really, it would be a matter of difficulty. Sophie's 7 tasks is a lot easier. In each one, they just need to choose between 2 items and the information in 1 sentence. The English club email is definitely more advanced. They need to look at this whole email and put 8 things in order. So a lot more challenging. But yes, you did perfectly. You justified your answer very well. Great job.
Thank you.
All right. You're welcome. So now we're ready to put our thinking caps on and kind of do some analysis here. So I think there are many benefits to this activity, which is why I wrote about it and why I'm here talking about it today. And I'm going to pick on you one last time, Chris. So you've been here the whole time and seen what we've been doing. Have any benefits spoken to you?
Yeah, there's lots of benefits. I do see a couple of questions coming through that I want to ask from our audience for you, Mina. Edison's asking about how much time for preparation for this activity did it require?
That is an excellent question. So it was a bit of time, but I have to say I enjoyed it. I enjoyed kind of figuring out what materials to use. And then once I found the materials for the first stage, it wasn't that difficult. I had a good idea of the kind of general questions I wanted to make. The detailed questions took a little more time, but I only had 2 for each item, so it wasn't too bad. For the second one, once I got the idea in my head, it didn't take so much time. And then once I had this idea, I adapted it for different types of things. And so it wasn't so time consuming, but there certainly was preparation. And the most important thing was being organized with it, just with so many moving parts. That's a great question.
Yeah, great answer too, Mina. That's wonderful. So you asked me about benefits, lots of benefits. I love this activity. I remembered a few things that you said earlier that I thought were really great, that it will help students remember, it will give them like a positive association with reading. And then one of the funnier things I thought benefits is that students won't fall asleep, so that was really good. In all seriousness, those are benefits, but student motivation, I love the movement. There's just so many great benefits from this activity. It's wonderful.
Thank you. Yeah, I'll just kind of sum up what I thought the benefits were. The authentic materials were very motivating and engaging. In fact, many students came to me after class and wanted to borrow materials and did. So that was successful. The task-based approach was also successful. I didn't really see students kind of with their finger looking at certain words or trying to translate certain words. They really were able to kind of look at the bigger picture and use their critical thinking. There's also a lot of interaction. I will warn you, this is not a quiet activity. The movement, as you mentioned, is a great thing, no sleeping at all. And then something I didn't really mention, but some of you might have noticed, there were a lot of choices that students were allowed to make, and this is pretty important in learning too. These last 2 points are supported by Jensen and Kusala, in that allowing students to make choices is great for learner autonomy. It really gives them a stake in their own learning. And then movement, of course, is also a great thing for the brain, that kind of physical connection. All right, but not everything is perfect. Let us move on. So audience at home, I'd like you to stop and think, and you probably have already been thinking some of these things. There are some challenges. So I would love to know, audience, what you think. What are some challenges that you anticipate with this activity or activities, tasks?
Yeah, everybody, let us know. There's obviously lots of great benefits from this activity, but we're curious about what do you think are some of the challenges that you've identified from this activity? What do you think would be difficult for you to do? We'd love to hear what you think some of the challenges are in the chat. And while we're waiting for those, Mina, we have a couple of questions about would it be possible, just maybe you can answer them later, would it be possible to use Padlet for this or different things like that? Some challenges people are identifying are just large groups of students, improper space. Yeah, very common, just large class size, 100 plus students. Wow, that's a big class. It'd be a bit difficult for this teacher in Bangladesh. Worrying about students switching to their L1 from Celia, that's true. Tanya saying time would be difficult. And I think Lena is talking about, might be a challenge, but they're suggesting breakout rooms, which I think you're going to get to. But yeah, just larger classes, maybe virtual learning would be quite difficult. So I think some people are interested to hear what you have to say about that. So yeah, all great responses, everybody. Thank you so much.
Those are great responses. And yeah, those are all, I would say, legitimate concerns. In terms of time, I would just maybe cut down the number of materials and the number of stations and tasks. It would be possible to do something in 10 minutes, quite honestly, if you just had limited it to 1 to 2 questions and maybe smaller texts. As far as large classes, I don't know about 100 students. That would be really challenging. I did do something with 50 teachers at a conference. I put them in 10 groups of 5, and they sat together away from the stations. They took turns being the person to go up to the station, select the material, bring it back to their group. They did their task, answered their questions. When they were done, they returned the material, and then a new person came up and selected another material. So there was still a little bit of movement involved, and we were able to maintain kind of the main part of it.
Yeah, we do have some more questions too, Mina. Fernando's asking, seems to be a common question amongst the followers, just how do you use stations in an online classroom? Is there anything like digital virtual stations, or could you help us out with that?
I do. I'm going to save that for like 2 minutes, because actually I do have an idea about that, and I'm glad people are interested in knowing. I think some of you have some ideas about it too. One other challenge is, again, authentic materials. Earlier, a lot of you mentioned that you do have access to authentic materials. Some of you still might be thinking, I don't know where to get any authentic materials. But also, as you brainstormed earlier, authentic materials is a huge category, and there are many available to us for free. So on the next slide. Yeah, this one. So if you do have internet available to you, which you do now as you are here, but even if you don't have it in your classroom or you don't have it all the time, when you do have availability, you can print from websites. You could print the homepage, a paragraph of a story, take a screenshot of an advertisement, and there you go. If you are in a situation where you have a computer lab or tablets, you could set the computers or tablets to different stations, and then students move around. Or you can recruit your students' phones, have them put the websites or whatever on their phones. Student work can be used. Your students create stories, they create essays, they can make lists. those would be useful. We all have receipts at home if they come from often hotels, tourist spots, sometimes restaurants or online. They're often in English. And then realia or real things can be used. If you have some food items, beauty products, medications, those often have labels in English, and you could use those for kind of a quick stations. All right, so moving on. Finally, we're running a little short, but I want to talk about adapting for different contexts. So in the article, I have several other ideas, but here I'll share with you two. One is with extensive reading, this reading that students usually do at home for pleasure. In my situation, they often come back the next day and complain, oh, this is too hard or it's too boring because they just looked at the cover and ran off. But if we have them answer some questions, like what is the genre? Where does the story take place? And then they can have a better idea if they actually want to read it. Or online, I saw a lot of people are talking about breakout rooms. If you have the ability to use breakout rooms, then these are your groups, and you can send texts to them or links to text and have them discuss and answer questions like that. Once they finish, then you can send them a new link or a new text. You could also send a list of links and have students look around and find different things. Or if they have access to internet, you can just kind of have a scavenger hunt. They have to find different websites or links that satisfy certain criteria. Someone mentioned Padlet earlier. I haven't used Padlet enough, but I'm guessing that there's a way to do this. So although you would be missing out on the physical action, you could still do these sort of tasks. If we have time, I would love to know what the audience thinks, if they have any other ideas for ways to adapt these tasks to their own situations.
Yeah, everybody, how about you? So what are some adaptations that you can think of for these ideas that Mina has shared with us? Let us know in the chat about different things. Let's see, we have a question about adapting authentic materials for multi-level classrooms, which I thought was an interesting question. It's really interesting, yeah. Then lots of positive comments. People are just saying amazing topic, Miss Mina, wonderful, lots of wonderful ideas, and thank you so much for all of this. We do have one adaptation, maybe fewer stations from Mahela. I thought that in that person's case was really good. That's a really good adaptation. Ivan suggesting maybe doing some role plays would be an adaptation. That's a great one, Ivan. Yeah, many thanks. Lots of thanks coming in your way, Mina. So it's wonderful.
That is wonderful.
So yeah, they weren't aware of stations, so now they're all excited to use it if they haven't used stations before. And then yeah, Micah is saying that he'll use it with receipts in the future, and he's been talking about cooking, and he thinks it will work great in his class.
Oh, that's awesome. Great ideas. Those are really wonderful. Just quickly, for the different levels, you can have one material, whether it's a receipt or an essay, and the type of question can be differentiated. Just identifying the title or the author is something lower levels can do, and then you can just up it from there and get as kind of more difficult for the levels, I think. Well, thanks everybody. I have really enjoyed interacting with you all. You have great ideas, great suggestions. I hope that you can take something useful away from this. And most importantly, I hope that you can motivate your students to read. It is one of the most important things we can do for language acquisition. I hope you get a chance to look at my article. I also have some references if you're interested in exploring some of the concepts we talked about further. But mostly I just want to thank you all for being here. And I want to thank the American English staff for just putting on a great session.
Well, thank you so much, Mina. What a wonderful webinar. Thank you so much for sharing all these great ideas on using station-based learning and authentic material.